Well, thank you so much. I assure you that my presentation is not going to be nearly as comical or funny. Actually, it's quite serious topic, so it'll be a quick shift in the mood. I apologize for that. And I do warn you in advance that I pack my talks full, and you'll feel like you're learning through a fire hose. I do that on purpose, even though people tell me not to do that. The reason is because I feel that we've already dumbed down our religion enough, and it's time to kind of raise the standard a little bit. So if you feel overwhelmed, don't worry about it. That's the intent. So the title of my talk is Why Religion Still Matters, Speeches to Religion's Uncultured Despisers. You'll see why I titled it this way soon. So at the turn of the century, there's a very famous man who said this, Nietzsche. He said, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers?" The idea was that now people were no longer believing in God. And Nietzsche realized that this is something very serious. And at that time, people hadn't really thought about the ramifications of this change from Christianity or belief to unbelief. Around the same time, there was another fella named Schleiermacher who published a work. It was actually in German. Translated, though, that's where I got the title from for this talk. His translated title is On Religion, Speeches to Its Cultured Despisers. Because at that time, it was very fashionable for the educated people to turn to atheism, and religious people were on the defensive. And so you had this theologian and intellectual who said, hey, hold on, wait a second. This thing that you're abandoning, which is religion, it's got certain good things that you may not be aware of. And so he was addressing these cultured despisers of religion. They were cultured because they were the educated elite. I switched my title to the uncultured despisers because now I think it's actually the other way around. Now, recently after the World Trade Center, 9/11, we have the rise of the new atheists, the new atheist movement, which honestly they're quite uncultured and unread, and they just don't know it. So I'm going to do, just like he had a bunch of speeches, I'm going to do a bunch of speeches. This is my first speech on this topic, so I'm hoping to do a series on this. We'll see how this one goes. So before we start, let's talk about what the problem is. Well, it's called the Secularization Thesis, the idea that as societies advance in modernity, religion declines and will eventually disappear altogether. Now, this thesis is very controversial. It got beat back a little bit, but now people are thinking, hey, it might be true at least to some extent. Definitely in certain parts of the world. So in Western Europe, for example, religion is very much on the decline, and it probably will not recover. Here you see the decline of religion, and it's taking place in the United States as well. It's a precipitous decline, especially since the 1970s. It's just been all downhill. The map basically is showing that Western Europe is the least religious. Now that's something that some people celebrate. This is one of the new atheists. Steven Pinker is his name. He's a Harvard professor. He wrote this book called Enlightenment Now, and it's kind of the idea that this is a good thing, this enlightenment. They think enlightenment was a secular atheistic phenomenon. It was not, but in any case, they're calling for reason, science, humanism, and progress. I debated this fella just this week. His name is Haris Sultan. He's a new atheist, ex-Muslim from Pakistan. While I was preparing for talking to him, I read his book, and I decided, to make my time useful, I'm actually going to repurpose this and actually make it into a lecture series, and that's what I'm doing here today. So I'm going to be referencing Haris Sultan's book, which is right there. So you see them kind of powerful image, breaking the chains of religion. That's a powerful image there. Now Richard Dawkins, he's kind of the head of the new atheist movement, really, the iconic head. He calls religion a parasite or a mind virus or a byproduct of evolution, a bad byproduct. And if it's a virus, well, what do you do with the virus? You want to get rid of a virus, right? So the goals of my talk are actually to look at religion from a sociological perspective. And I'm going to be arguing, and really an evolutionary psychology perspective, and show that actually it's the case that religion confers certain undeniable benefits to society which atheism cannot provide. Religion is really an evolutionary advantage. Now, when we're analyzing religion in this way, this doesn't mean that religion, you can't think of religion in a divine way. And actually one of the pushbacks I got was somebody said, well, why don't you first talk about proofs of God, proofs of the prophecy of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and go from there. And then you could just convince the person of what you want. But I actually don't think that that's how people, I don't think that's how people work. There's this good book called The Righteous Mind, in which the author, Jonathan Haidt, he analyzes how people come to conclusions and ideas. And what he found is that really people start with intuitions that they get immediately, and then they post hoc rationalize those intuitions. Meaning they already have their mind made up from before, and then when you ask them, they have to justify it to themselves. When we look at the benefits of religion from this perspective, of course, it would be a logical fallacy to say that that speaks to its truth value. Just because something's useful doesn't mean it's true. But on the other hand, if all of the sociological data showed that religion was harmful, don't you think the new atheists would show that and point to that? So the fact that the data that I'm going to show you shows that religion is actually very beneficial to society, I think that's worthwhile. And I think it will also move people in the direction of, well, the analogy that he gives in this book is, he says that everyone you can imagine has an elephant and a rider on top of it in your mind. So imagine an elephant and a rider on top of that elephant in your mind. And what he says is, when someone asks you your view on something, it's actually the elephant that will decide which direction you turn, yes or no. So if it's a very controversial topic, let's say abortion or whatever the latest thing is, you've already going to make up your mind, but it's the elephant that's actually going to move for you. The rider on top is your rational mind. He or she is just beholden to the elephant. So the elephant is more emotional, goes on emotion. And then once the elephant moves in a certain direction, then the rider on top will then rationalize that decision and say, these are the reasons why we believe X, Y, and Z. It's a good book. You should read it. So speech number 1, the myth of religion as a parasite. So I'm not the only one who says that religion is an evolutionary adaptation. In fact, I think that would be the dominant viewpoint other than the new atheists. They believe that religion probably is an evolutionary advantage, and that's why all major civilizations have had a religion. And now we've moved away from religion, and we actually see that that civilization, at least numerically, is getting less fit. We'll see that fertility rates are very much down. They can't even replenish their population. So we see that maybe religion is an advantage to a civilization, and that's why all major civilizations have religious tendencies. Now, the author that I talked to, Haris Sultan, he thinks there's nothing good in religion. He fails to see anything good from the baggage of religion. He disagrees with the idea that religion is necessary to keep our society in order. In fact, as I showed him in my debate, almost all of the Enlightenment thinkers thought that. The founding fathers thought that. And in fact, the classical Islamic philosophers of old also thought that you need religion in order for society to function correctly. He also, Haris Sultan, this new atheist, also disagrees that religion is important for ethics and morals. However, I argue, and this author as well, who's also an atheist, he argues that religion solves 2 major problems. The first is the need to live together in communities in harmony, despite our deeply rooted selfish and violent impulses. And second is the need to cope with terrifying degrees of pain, whether this is the pain that you feel in somebody passes away in your life, you have a professional problem at work or a failure at work, troubled relationships. Religion is a source of solace. So what we see here is the 2 main aims. The first is social, involving community, and the second is on the individual level. I initially thought it made sense to go the other way around, but then I realized actually it makes sense to start with the social, because religion is something that's eminently social, as Emil Durkheim said. So on the left-hand side, the one that's crossed out, that's actually the view of religion that new atheists have, and honestly some religious fundamentalists. They believe that everything starts from belief, whatever you believe, and then you do action based on that. So Sam Harris, a new atheist, he thinks ideas are what matter, and it's the bad ideas in Islam and the Quran that cause people to become terrorists and bomb and do all those kind of things. So that's their simplistic view, that belief, you just read something and then that's what you do. So if you want to know what people do, all you do is read their religious texts and you'll know what they do. But scholars don't agree with this. That's not how it works. In fact, a better model is what's on the other side, which shows that there's another major element of religion, which is belonging. Religion is all about belonging to a community. We're here together as a community right now. So it's actually a three-way relationship, and they all influence each other: belief, belonging, and doing. And they all act synergistically. So this guy, he's the one who said what I just said. Religion is an eminently social thing. He started to realize, this sociologist, that religion has all sorts of benefits that it confers to societies. One of them is rituals. So we've lost the idea of rituals in a secular atheistic society like the one that we live in. So what all we do have is, well, the closest thing we can think of is sports. So in sports, you have these rituals that people engage in. And what you notice is when people dress in the same clothes, they do the same actions, they actually start what this author calls, they start hiving together. He's saying like a beehive. Bees, once they hive together, they will do all sorts of things in unison, and they'll even all die for the queen bee. So they all act in unison. They no longer act selfishly. Human beings are not like that. Human beings are generally selfish, self-involved. But if you can switch the hive switch on, if you can put the switch on, then they can start hiving. And so what sociologists have noticed, or evolutionists, or psychologists, sorry, is that when people engage in synchronized rituals, you actually have something called collective effervescence. That is, when you act collectively, you kind of transcend your own self, and you become bonded to the group around you. So this hive switch is flipped on and makes people feel for a few hours that they are simply a part of the whole. Scientists have looked in the lab, how does ritual work? And what psychologists have noticed is that there's something called motor synchrony. Moving parts of your body in time with others is part of many rituals around the world. And in one lab experiment, for example, they even did something as silly as made someone tap and someone else tap, and they did it asynchronously. And then another group did it together, synchronously. And what they found is the group that tapped together was more likely to help a third person after they did this experiment. So there was something that was going on that was making people less selfish and more worried about the group when you do stuff together. That's why militaries will do synchronized rituals, right? This is why they march in step. This is not for just a display. This actually makes all the soldiers work together and ready to die for each other. But the most effective kind of rituals are the ones that are actually related to religion. The reason is because they have a sacred aspect to them. So most of the effects these scientists found were magnified when the synchrony had a sacred element to it. So when you believe that what you are doing together is something sacred, the effects are magnified. So what we find is that beliefs, symbols, actions, and group behavior can work synergistically to magnify each other's impact. Now, of course, as believers, we may believe that in addition to this kind of scientific effect, there could be what we call in Arabic barakah, blessing that is divine on a spiritual level. So this doesn't negate that aspect, but this is another aspect that we should look into that we can see scientifically. To show this, I want to take a look at this kind of activity. Now, you don't have to pass a fatwa of whether you agree with this or disagree with it. The crowd will be split in half. But the point is that this is a perfect example of collective effervescence, people acting in unison together and bonding together. So what you see there is people acting in synchrony, and they have this feeling of transcendence beyond them. They're bonding, uniting with the divine, and as such, uniting together as well in the divine. So this is even something that they can see in the lab. Here's another one that just kind of, I like this visual here. The point here is that even your body organs, your breathing patterns, your pulse, your blood pressure change when you engage in this activity, and they can see that in the lab. What do you think is going on here? Here you have synchrony, right? Everyone is moving around together in a sacred event. This is very powerful. So this is, again, called collective effervescence. We like big, complicated terms. So collective effervescence is the transcending of the individual, uniting with the transcendent, and thus with the wider group. So they did, some sociologists, or I think it's an anthropologist, he looked at different communes, that is little communities that are formed, and found, so they had all these different communes that have been formed over the 19th, 20th century, and what they found is that the ones that were religious survived a heck of a lot more than the ones that were secular. Why is that? Why did the religious communes survive over the secular ones? Well, one of the reasons is due to sacrifice. I don't mean like doing zibah, I don't mean that, but what I mean is the secret ingredient is doing something that's difficult. The reason why I put these two images up here is these individuals have done something very difficult. It's a sacrifice that they have taken. For example, the clothes that they are wearing is a sacrifice. You have now put distance between you and the environment that you're around. People are going to look at you funny. People are going to, there's a cost. But because there's that cost, like even growing out that beard, that's a cost. But once you do that, what they notice is that the more sacrifice you give, the longer that community, that religious community, lasted. So what's interesting, it's an irony that in the 19th century, or the 20th century, sorry, the more liberal Protestant churches started to die off. They were the dominant group, and then they died off. And we think the reason is because they made it too easy to be in the community. So people could go in and out with no cost. When you have a community where there's costs involved, ironically, you stick with that group much longer, or the people that do stick with it much longer. So that's what religion does. And religion then gets rid of one of the big problems, which is called the free rider problem, where you have people who are selfish, who just want to benefit from the community, who will come to an event like this just to get the food and then run off and never contribute, never give donations, never do anything. I'm not pointing to anyone. I'm new here. So, but this gets rid of that problem because people have to pay something. There's an entrance fee. So there's an entrance fee into religion. Islam is not easy, as young people know, right? Well, it's supposed to be easy, but there are still some costs, right? You have to, it's not hedonistic, right? It's not do whatever you want. So what they found is that religious sacrifices are always, they're always more effective when there's this sacred element to it. So sacredness binds people together. So what this author concludes is that God or gods really do help groups cohere, succeed, and outcompete other groups. This is why religion was an evolutionary advantage. Societies that were more bonded together would outcompete other groups. So they were more cohesive and trusting of each other. Here are some rituals that we engage in. Notice the synchrony. Notice what we're doing. We're bowing down, we're lowering our bodies. This all has an effect on your organs, on your breathing, on your blood pressure, on your state of mind, all of these things. And then after you engage in this synchronized activity, at the end of it is usually when you raise your hands up and ask for things. Believe it or not, that's much more effective psychologically than if you just started out by asking. And it's done, and even here on the other, and you see on these two pictures how they're dressed. Even when whether you wear the headscarf or not, but at home often women will put the headscarf on before they are going to do something. Men will put on a cap even if they don't normally wear it. That changes something inside of you. It takes you out from what's called the profane or the regular world out there, the mundane world, and puts you in that sacred space, and that affects your mind and your body. Religions also have what's called sacred calendars. All religions follow certain calendar, certain times of the day you do things. So we pray 5 times a day. Weekly we have a Friday prayer. Through the year, you have certain events like Ramadan. That's a whole month of the year that you give. You have Eid prayers or events, days. And then you have certain days of your life, like when a child is born. There's what's called an akika. There's when you finish reading the Quran. We call it, some people call it the khatam, or in South Asian cultures, I think we call it an amin. There's the big events of your life that are all marked off by religious rituals and practices which solemnize those events. And they actually make what you're entering into probably more effective. So for example, religious ceremonies related to marriage have a positive effect on marriages, actually. And there's, we'll talk about that shortly. But even, for example, when your child is born and you whisper in the child's ear, you whisper the adhan in their ear, they've actually, in this book that I was reading, they're talking about how that actually increases the love of the parent for the child. Because it marks it off. It snaps the brain and says, this is something special. I also think religion operates by obligation. That these can't be all optional, extra credit things. Why? Because the reality is that whenever anything becomes extra credit, you're going to slack off. And we are designed in such a way that certain times we need to be told that we just have to do it. And then after we do it, then we feel better that we have done it. I don't know if you've had this situation, you're at home, I told the wife, hey, she's feeling maybe down a little bit, taking care of the kid the whole day. And I say, hey, let's go out, let's go get some dinner. I don't feel like it, I don't want to go. I'm not feeling well. Kind of force her, let's go. And then what happens when we go out for dinner? She's like, hey, I'm so glad you made me come out, right? So in the moment, we may not know what's best for us. It's after we do the little sacrifice, get ready, spend that energy, then we feel better. So the way religion approaches the human being is actually very different than what we can call secular liberalism. And I'm not passing any judgments on liberalism, but I'm just showing that this is the dominant philosophy. I think it's good to have a balanced approach toward it, not hate it all 100% or love it 100%, but it is different than the traditional religious mentality. Liberalism focuses on autonomy. The individual, they imagine the individual as always fully rational, fully independent. And then you make your own decisions all the time. But what traditional religion realizes is that, in fact, we individuals are usually fallen, fallible, prone to error and sin, broken, in loss, and in desperate need of God. So religions are usually very paternalistic. And that's a good thing. We need that. As the Quran says, verily man is in loss. And here man just means human. So rituals act on an individual level. They decrease stress, anxiety. They've done this, even the neuroscience is showing this. Belief calms activity centers in the brain that are associated with alarm bell experiences. These are the same effect that certain medications like Valium and Xanax can have on you. Simply put, thinking about God makes people calmer. But it's not just rituals. It's also belief. Religion is a cure for one of modernity's worst effects that Nietzsche was talking about, which is nihilism. Nihilism, and hedonism, by the way. We'll define both of these. So nihilism is the idea that life has no intrinsic meaning, purpose, or value. That we are just matter in motion. We're just molecules. We just evolved over time from random events. We're a puny little object on a puny little planet hurtling through space. There are different authors who have talked about this, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky. The person I was in dialogue with, this is what he says. He approvingly quoted Dawkins, who said, the universe does not owe human beings any hope. And then he himself, Har Sultan, writes, the universe was not created for us. We are not special. Why do we have to feel special all the time? Think about a zebra that is born in a world of terror. Most of them get eaten before their first birthday. This is how most of the humans live for hundreds and thousands of years. This is a very nihilistic view of the world. And we can see why that could lead to despair if we're just this, we're just like ants. He says further, why do humans consider themselves so special? Why do they always demand comfort? He says, isn't it a nice feeling that we are so special that billions of galaxies with trillions of stars have been made just for us? I would answer, yes. He says, we're a puny species living on a tiny planet in an insignificant part of an insignificant galaxy. But the Bible and the Quran, they actually talk about how important we are, how significant we are. The biblical and Quranic stories of creation are actually anthropocentric. That is, they center on man. People don't realize this. Many believers don't realize it. They think as though they center on God. It actually centers on man. God creates the entire universe for human beings with them in mind. Adam is God's vicegerent on earth. We are special. In fact, we're more than just matter, fleshy, corporeal. We have a divine part of us. That's the soul that God himself breathes into us. The soul is divine, and in that sense, we are divine. We come from this loving God, and we will return to him. This is a much better picture, I would say, than that nihilistic picture that secular atheism gives us. My interlocutor, Haris Sultan, just hand waves this away. He says, look, atheists go through dark times as well and manage to pull themselves out of depression without finding this non-existent God, he says. But in fact, atheism has a big suicide problem, as this atheist writer is talking about. And now you have even suicide booths. This is not now just fiction. This is happening now. So religion solves the problem of existential angst, the idea of what is my life about? What are we here for? So religion is all about meaning making. The Quran is full of parables and allegories and stories that are all meant for meaning making. Religion answers the existential questions of life that science can simply not answer. Human beings without meaning fall into despair. So that is what sacred narratives are about. It's about fact over, it's not just fact, it's about value, what ought to be. Religion uses highly symbolic language to convey these deeper, higher truths, the deepest questions of life. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead because we're running out of time, but these are the important questions that religion answers. Where did we come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? And where we came from, even when it comes to the human creation story, it tells us a deeper truth than scientific, just purely evolution does. Evolution tells us we're just random accidents. But the Quran, the biblical and the Quranic story tell us that we have a purpose, that we are meaningful, and that we all come from the same root, from the same Adam. And in that sense, we are all equal. That's a deeper truth than science can tell us. We are something more than just the material and the corporeal, and it's our non-material spirit that really matters. So it tells us what we are. It also tells us why we are here. What is the purpose of life? What is our telos? Our telos means where are we supposed to go? We're supposed to return to the divine, to meet with, have divine union with God, to become like God. And it tells us what we should do. We should perfect the self, rising above the level of the material or the fleshy, the carnal desires, the perfection of virtues and reason. Love of God and love of his creation, the golden rule. As the hadith says, be merciful to those on the earth, and the one in the heavens will have mercy upon you. So, and who are we here with? We are part of a moral community, striving together for the ultimate ideal, God, and the betterment of the world around us. This is a whole narrative, a story that ties us together, gives us meaning and purpose. It also tells us where we will go, that what we do matters. It will resonate, that we will be held to account for what we do. Immanuel Kant, famous Enlightenment thinker, said that we must believe in this. We must believe and hope that our souls are immortal. So the problem is that the new atheists, they only focus on what's called logos, logic, rationality. That's important. We believe in that. But that's a very limited view of the world. You also need mythos, sacred narrative, story. You also need pathos, emotion, experiential, experience. They don't engage in rituals. They don't know what the benefit of that is. And ethos, character, people that you look up to that have character. This is a more holistic way of approaching life than just pure rational logic, because we are not pure rational creatures, believe it or not. But these are the studies. This is what they show. On average, religious people are happier. And this is not, by the way, people who simply claim that they're Muslim or Christian, but these are people who actually practice the religion, who actually go to church, who go to mosque. Actually, that's one of the highest indicators that you'll reap these benefits, is by engaging in these communal acts. So religious people, on average, researchers have found, are happier. There are multiple studies that have shown this consistently. Religious people are actually more charitable. And again, these are people who are actually practicing, not just saying that they're religious. So donations by religious Americans to charitable causes are vastly larger than people who are secular or non-religious. And they donate to secular causes as well, way more than non-religious people. So it's not just religious causes that they're donating to. There's an enormous charity gap between the religious and the secular. And US Muslims, by the way, are extremely generous. So this article shows that they gave more charity than any other Americans in 2020. Religious people are also more civically engaged. They vote more, they volunteer more, they volunteer even in non-religious or secular causes like the Red Cross, soup kitchens. They vote more in local elections. People vote in the national elections, but we're talking about the local ones. Religious people volunteer more. Religious people are also less lonely. There's a loneliness epidemic in some countries. It's debatable, but I think it's true. In fact, in some countries, really secular atheistic countries, the percentage of people who live alone in their homes by themselves, like only one person, is like about 50%. That's astonishing. So we went from the extended family, that was kind of the traditional religious experience, to the nuclear family, and now we're going to the single person. Religious people are less depressed. Study after study has shown that. Religion is nature's antidepressant. I did want to show this video.
So when you look at the really unique, bizarre things humans have come up with, ranging from cave paintings to Snapchats and everything in between, probably the most unique and universal thing we've come up with is this religion business. When you talk about symbolic, metaphorical thinking, essentially there has been no culture on earth that has not invented some form of what could be termed meta-magical thinking, attributing things that cannot be seen, faith-based belief systems, things of that sort. It's universal. 95% of people believe in some sort of omnipotent something or other out there. Every culture out there has it. People have endlessly speculated about the evolution of religiosity. And at least in terms of westernized religions, it makes perfect sense why they've evolved, because they're wonderful mechanisms for reducing stress. It is an awful, terrifying world out there where bad things happen and we're all going to die eventually. And believing that there is something, someone responsible for it, at least gives some stress-reducing attributes built around understanding causality. If on top of that, you believe there is not only something out there responsible for all of this, but that there is a larger purpose to it, that's another level of stress-reducing explanation. If then on top of it, you believe that individual out there is benevolent, even more so, control and predictability. Benevolent and listens to human entreaties, more elements of control. Benevolent listens to human entreaties and prefers to listen to people like you, who look like you, pray like you, request like you, even more so. They're just all these levels of control, predictability, they're stress reducing. And what is infuriating to me as an utter complete atheist is a very, very solid literature showing the health benefits of religiosity. Independent of, you tend to get a social supportive community when you're religious, you have fewer lifestyle risk factors. The mere ability to perceive causality, reason, benevolence especially for people like me, if I say the right combination of words and fervently believe in it, that's wonderfully protective and there's health benefits to it. If it is a totally heartless, indifferent, apathetic universe out there, you are far more at risk for all the logical things, which is to conclude it is an utterly depressing universe out there. Rates of depression are much higher among atheists, go figure. So in terms of that, it makes perfect sense why this is something that people have come up with. And rather than asking why is it that 95% of humans come up with some form of religiosity, much more biologically interesting question to me is what's up with the 5% of atheists who don't do that?
All right, suicide, less likely to commit suicide. This has been known for a long time. Emil Durkheim found that. So religion is actually protective for suicide. This is a good book, The Atheist's Guide to Reality, written by an atheist philosopher. He's a materialist, so he actually goes all the way. He embraces scientism. He says, you don't need religion. All you need is Prozac. Just take 2 Prozac, because the problem is just in your brain. He says, people commit suicide because the neural circuitry in their brain is the problem. So just take whatever the psychiatrists give you, and that'll solve your world wariness. Take 2 of whatever neuropharmacology prescribes. So this is a very different approach to life. Religion itself can help with issues of substance abuse. So religious programs will help with that. Religious youth are 3 times less likely to binge drink, 4 times less likely to use illegal drugs. With Muslims, it's probably way higher. And it helps with rehab and recovery. So spiritual programs are more likely to be successful. There have been multiple studies about criminality. People who are more religious are less likely to commit crimes. So my interlocutor said, do we really need an imaginary police commissioner in the skies? Yes. In fact, they've done studies where if you just put an eye on the wall when somebody's taking tests, they're actually less likely to cheat if the eye is looking at them. And if they do a prayer before, they're less likely to cheat. People are more generous when they hear the adhan, the call to prayer. At that time, the shopkeepers, they've been found to be the most generous during the time of the prayer. So these things have an effect. The more one is involved in religious activities, the less likely one will be involved in criminal acts. You'll be less likely to have delinquent behavior. Again, these are many studies. I'll go through them really quickly. Rehabilitation programs, we've already talked about that. And this tracks true with Islam as well. All right, I'm going to skip through the rest. And then this is the last slide. I think this will require another lecture, but there's a tight correlation between religion and this is kind of a different topic, but I did want to bring it up just to kind of hint at what the next topic would be. But there's this tight correlation between religion and intact or large families. As religion dies, so does the family. Families form the core of society, so society dies. So loss of religion results in the breakdown of the family unit, more single-family homes, plummeting marriage and fertility rates, and higher divorce rates. Secular societies have a record number of people living in one-person households. We already talked about that. And then marital success and divorce, well, it's very much tied to religion. Highest rate of success if you meet your spouse in church. Lowest if you meet them at the bar or online dating apps. These are terrible, these dating apps. 6 times more likely to divorce. Cohabitation before marriage increases divorce by 33%. The highest rate of success if married or if 2 virgins marry. Virgins are the happiest in marriage. More sexual partners before marriage, more likely to be divorced. So there's tons of data on this, and this all tracks with religion. So I'm going to close with that, and I'm now open to questions.
What's that? Just hold it. All right, so the chart that showed the decline, can you tell us the factors that are leading to that decline?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, what is leading to the decline in religion? Well, the new atheist would have you say, would tell you, and actually my interlocutor told me that it was the Enlightenment that did that. Well, the Enlightenment was hundreds of years ago. It's not the Enlightenment. It's not that we're just becoming more rational. I think, and I'm not the only one who says this, there seems to be some correlation with the sexual revolution. That with the sexual revolution, you see the decline in religiosity. So more God, more family, less God. Notice, when you have kids, all of a sudden people go to church more. They go to the mosque more. Why? Because they're worried about their child, and they're saying, oh, I want my child to grow up in a religious, moral community. So there is this connection. It's a bilateral connection. Works both ways. But there are probably other factors as well. Modernity itself is one factor. Consumerism, materialism, the fact that you now we're much more mobile, so we leave our families. So when you leave your families, you're less likely. So there's always this connection with family.
Thank you for a nice presentation. My question is related to what we hear in the media, that Islam is the fastest growing religion. Does this align with your logic and thoughts?
Yeah. So in fact, that tees me up well for, oops. These are global fertility rates. If you look at them, look at the Islamic world. So the lightest colors have the lowest fertility rate. And you see that's most of Europe. Western Europe is really on the decline. This is the fertility rate in the United States, and then you see Europe. So it's really declining. So one of the major reasons that Islam the numbers are going up is because of the fertility rate, for sure. Now, the conversion rate is high too, but so is also, that's kind of matched by the people who are leaving the religion as well in the West. But yes, Islam is on the rise. Now, whether it's the highest, it's hard to tell because there are other smaller communities as well, like Mormons and other groups, that just because of how small they are, any growth percentage-wise is just going to be a lot larger. But of the major religions, definitely Islam is the fastest rising.
Assalamu alaikum. I appreciate your presentation. My thought, I just wanted to comment that critical thinking, I know as an American Muslim community here, and our mentor, Dr. Maher Hathout, Allah yarhamu, kind of distinguished in just where the role of critical thinking comes in the believing and doing, and I just feel like that's a very important aspect to getting away from the rituals and just solid rituals and being a whole individual. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll just repeat it just in case so everyone heard it. So it was more that we should focus on not just ritual, but also the rational aspect as well. And I 100% agree. So, and actually that's what I was debating with the person I debated with this week. I do believe that the Islamic world right now is suffering from religious dogmatism and fundamentalism. But what I was trying to share with him was that, in fact, the Islamic tradition has a long history of embracing reason. In fact, that the classical Islamic philosophers believed God is reason, and that the purpose of being a human being, what differentiates us from the animals, is our reason, our capacity to reason, and that the goal of religion is to master one's reason, so that ultimately even one does not need to be guided by fears of punishment and reward of paradise, because one ideally would rationally know what the right is and what the wrong is and would just follow that. The problem is that we're not all perfectly human, rational creatures, and we do have our carnal desires and our fleshy body and these. So I do think it's a balance that we need. And so the problem, I think, in the West is that it's all logos and in the just all pure rationality, which doesn't do the trick, I think. But I think in the Islamic world, definitely we've moved away from valuing human reason. In fact, I grew up learning that reason was something bad, whims, desires, that's what it was equated to, and that really you're just supposed to follow revelation and reason will lead you astray. That doesn't map on with the dominant Islamic intellectual tradition. That's a very modern thing, unfortunately. But all in all, I definitely agree with you that we need both. We need all of that, all of the above.
You said you're going to have this presentation on YouTube. Are you focusing on YouTube now? Because this is actually where the future is. Because we watch a lot of series on YouTube, religious series, like, for example, a priest, what color they wear. And yesterday, actually, we watched about the Sikhism, how the Sikh is formed. So we want actually something with that quality to be on YouTube. So what is the plan of you or MPAC doing that?
Somebody must have paid you to ask this question, because so we did launch a YouTube channel. It's called The Impactful Scholar. So it's MPAC's YouTube show. This is where this is going up, exactly because you identified the problem, that basically 75% of young people that are consuming their content online from their phones, and YouTube is a primary source, as well as social media. So that was the whole pitch to MPAC, to bring me on, actually, to have a very online-facing project. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. Anyone else? Oh.
Thank you, Dr. Hashmi, for a very enlightening talk. One thing that we're seeing with a lot of the younger generation is this: I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. What in your readings, or what have you seen? What is causing? It's not atheism. It's not them leaving the religion, but it's just like, I'm just a spiritual person. I'm just not a religious person. What do you tell parents? What do you tell the youth about how to kind of confront this and combat that?
That's a great question. Thank you. So the question is about what about this new trend, which is I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Before I answer that, I wanted to clarify one thing. I don't want to give new atheists or atheists the credit for making people leave religion. What we're actually suffering from is irreligion, the lack of religion. It's not that people are, going on a rational quest, reading some atheist books, thinking in their head. Remember, I talked to you about the elephant and the rider. It's the elephant that has been moving, and the rational part comes later. So I do think that the reason why irreligion has happened is because of, number one, I definitely tie it to the sexual revolution, the breakdown of the families, these things. And this trend of I'm spiritual but not religious is an attempt to grasp at these things that I'm talking about, to say, because there's a feeling of something missing in their lives, this big hole, because the logos, the rational part, is not enough. And people feel that. The young people feel that. And they have this nihilistic despair. Even Sam Harris, this big new atheist, is all about spirituality, and he's trying to get some Buddhist meditation and all that kind of stuff. And even, in fact, one of the books that I pointed to was Religion for Atheists, in which he has actually very positive take on religion. But he says, I don't really believe in God, I don't believe in any of that stuff, but I still want to get the benefits, reap the benefits of religion. So maybe atheists, we can have a church, we can have some rituals, and we'll get the benefits. First of all, the studies show that that doesn't really work. And I actually think the magic sauce, the real ingredient, is missing, and it won't work. In fact, there was a guy who did that in the 19th century, Auguste Comte, who realized that religion is important but didn't believe in God and all this stuff, or traditional religion. And so he tried to create a religion of his own, and it failed miserably. And I think it will fail. I think the belief in God is the essential ingredient. That is what brings people. And that is what binds people together, the belief in the transcendent, belief in the divine. If you just believe this is the material world and that's it, I don't think you're going to be successful. And I also think that you need to inhabit a tradition. So I don't think you can just pick and choose and, today I'll go do some Hindu rituals, I'll do some Buddhist rituals and combine them and mix and match them. I just don't think that works. You have to be bounded to a specific tradition and a community. And that's what's shown the success. That's my view.
A lot of the data that you showed is more or less the last 200 years or so. Historically, is this something that goes in waves, or is it's just going downhill?
So the question is whether this data is just the recent past, or does it go back further, and are there waves? That's a great question. I don't know if there is data that exists for that, but I have read some people who argue that religion does go in waves, and that it is very possible that we're in a dip and that it will go up it might go up. I feel like I'm more on the pessimistic side. So I kind of lean towards the people who said once it's gone, it's gone. And that's why I'm extremely anxious about what's going to happen with the Islamic world. And I think the balancing game that we're going to have is exactly the question that was being asked. How do we balance the reason aspect and the rationality with that more traditional religious practice and all that stuff? And I think we need to marry those two together. Because I think once religion is lost, I think it's very hard to bring it back. Because really the religion that lasts is the one that you grow up with, the ones that your parents teach you. There are converts, but most converts will leave the faith after a few years, most. Not all. Some of them become sheikhs and sheikhas and convert 1,000 people, but a lot of them leave, and one of the reasons is because they can't find the community. they're not welcomed in the community, the resources aren't there, the initial interest is there, high five, congratulations, yeah, we got another one, put it on the scoreboard, and then then it's lost after a while. So I think teaching your kids religion is extremely important, and making sure that you marry, or your kids marry, someone who's, the advice I always give is, look for someone who's more religious than you. Look for someone who's a little bit more conservative than you as well. Maybe they annoy you at some things, but yeah.
I just want your opinion on the following. The younger generation, okay, the ones that are moving away from religion, they feel that religion is binding. You have to do this, you have to do this. And no, I want to be free. I want to be myself. I think, and tell me what you think, is that I think the best way to get them back, or to explain to them that how is religion beneficial to their life, and you don't have to be bound by tradition and ceremonies, and just if they understand how each command that came down from God has a benefit to real life, not something heavily you have to obey regardless whether you understand it or not. I think that might be a better approach to get these people back. Your thoughts?
This is a great question again. So the question is, would it be better to not be kind of hunkered down or burdened by all of these rituals and formalistic things that don't make sense, and that we explain things to our kids and go on the more rational sense? The fear that I have is that that's exactly what the liberal Protestant, the mainline Protestant churches did, and they all died off. Now, I myself am, if you know me, I mean, I'm known as a kind of liberal Islamic thinker, a reformist. So I'm all about that we need to embrace modernity in a critical way. But at the same time, I fear that as we need to take one step forward, but we still need to have one step firmly in the tradition and practice. And if we move too fast, we'll fall over. So this is a very scary thing, because I agree that people are leaving the faith when it's not relevant, it doesn't make sense, and it's too fundamentalist. And honestly, yeah, the major reason children and younger people are not taking religion seriously is not because they read a proof that God doesn't exist or something. It's because they think it's superstitious, it doesn't make sense, it's not relevant, it's just fairy tales. And that's why I wanted to present this today, to show, hey, wait a second. Before you just throw this thing out that you think is useless, it's got some uses. So I think we have to balance tradition, rationality, ritual, community. This is tough.